All right, let's dive in. Have you ever been on one of those projects that just seems to drag on forever? You hit one roadblock, then another, and another. We've all been there. Well, today we're going to talk about a framework that's all about smashing through those delays by finding the one thing that's actually holding you back.
Seriously, think about that for a second. On any big project, it's almost never a dozen different things causing the delay. It's usually just one single continuous chain of tasks that sets the pace for the entire thing. Now, in project management, they call this the critical path, but we've got a much better name for it. And that one thing is what we call the long pole, okay? Imagine your whole project is a giant tent. The canvas, that's all the features and functionality you have to deliver. Now, if you want to lower that tent, finish the project faster, you can't just go around cutting random ropes. That's chaos. No, you have to find the single longest pole holding the whole thing up, and you have to shorten that. That right there is the secret.
So let's get a little more specific. What exactly is this long pole? Because really understanding it is the first step to being able to do something about it. This visual is just perfect because it nails the core idea. See, the tent itself, that's the scope of your project. All the features, the quality, the stuff you promise to deliver. We don't want the tent to collapse, right? The goal isn't to just randomly cut features. The goal is to systematically and intelligently shorten that long pole, your real time, so that the entire structure comes down faster, all in one piece.
Okay, so how do we actually do this? How do we find and shorten this long pole? Well, it's not about guessing or just telling everyone to work harder. It's about using a very clear three-phase framework that's built for speed.
And here it is. This is the roadmap. It's 3 simple steps. First, you have to identify the reality. Be brutally honest about where you are. Second, you analyze and challenge every single assumption about that reality. And third, you make this a cycle. It's about continuous optimization. Simple on the surface, but incredibly powerful when you put it into practice. So let's dig into that first phase, which, honestly, is the hardest part for most teams. It's the reality check. And as you can see, we call this facing your ugly baby, because it's about looking at the one thing the team really, really wants to ignore. This is so crucial. It all starts with radical honesty. Too many teams just don't want to admit how far behind they actually are. They don't want to admit that their beautiful, perfect plan, their baby, is, well, kind of ugly. But you can't fix a problem you refuse to see. Until you admit the truth, you can't find the real long pole. You're just wasting time on symptoms. And this visual just drives that point home. You have to shine a big, bright, uncomfortable light on the truth. You need to visually show everyone the gap between where you're headed and where you need to be. That gap, that is your problem. The long pole lives inside that gap. And only when the entire team sees it and feels it can you actually start solving the right problem together. Okay, so once you've found the long pole, you move into phase 2, analyze and challenge. This is where you put on your detective hat. You have to drill down into why that pole is so long, asking why over and over again until you get to the real root cause constraints.
And I mean, you have to challenge everything. Is there a bunch of unnecessary wait time baked into the schedule? Are you following some old legacy process just because that's how we've always done it? Are there bloated, gold-plated steps in there that don't actually add any value? This is where you find the pieces of the pole you can cut out without making the whole tent fall down.
And that leads us right into phase 3, continuous optimization. See, this is not a one-time meeting. This isn't a one-and-done fix. Shortening the long pole has to become a weekly obsession. It's a relentless, iterative process where the team gets together week after week to find new ways to whittle down that pole. Now, let's just circle back for a second to that super important first step, facing reality. Because there's one specific reality that teams get wrong almost every single time, and it's one of the biggest project killers out there. And that is the time it actually takes to invent something new. Just take a look at this table. This is a big dose of hard truth. Teams are pathologically optimistic about how long invention takes. If your project has literally 0 new invention, sure, maybe you can do it in a year. But if you need even a little bit of incremental invention, you better add 1 to 2 times years to your plan. A true breakthrough, we're talking 3 to 5 additional years. If you ignore this reality, you're creating an impossible long pole before you even start.
Okay, so this framework sounds good in theory, right? But does it actually work when the pressure is on? In the real world, with billions of dollars on the line? Well, let's look at an amazing case study that proves it does.
So the challenge was absolutely massive. We're talking about building a multi-billion-dollar semiconductor fab from scratch. This wasn't just construction. It involved developing an advanced new process and producing a supercritical, time-sensitive chip for a major customer. The deadline was considered pretty much impossible by everyone involved.
Now what you're looking at here is the project's actual progress chart. That blue line is the target, the date they had to hit. The black line is their weekly forecast of when they'd actually finish. You can see how, at the beginning, it's all over the place. But just watch what happens as they start applying this framework, relentlessly going after their long pole, week in and week out.
And boom, there it is, the payoff. Right near the end, they had a breakthrough. They completely rethought how they were handling tool processing time, which was their long pole at that moment, and they achieved a massive 10-day pull-in on the schedule. They didn't just hit their impossible deadline, they crushed it. They finished nearly 2 weeks early.
And here's the most important part of that story. They didn't do it by throwing more bodies at the problem or by working themselves to death. They did it because they used this framework. They systematically found their true constraint, they challenged every assumption about it, and they optimized it with some breakthrough thinking. They worked smarter, not just harder.
This slide really just sums up the whole journey perfectly. It starts by honestly identifying that gap between your forecast and your target. Then you ask why, and you challenge everything. And finally, through that continuous iterative planning, you watch that gap systematically shrink until your reality finally lines up with your target. It's a beautiful thing.
And at the end of the day, this is the whole philosophy in one sentence. Rapid execution isn't some fuzzy concept or just wishful thinking. It's a discipline. It's a gritty process. It means you never just accept the current plan as fact, you treat it as a temporary theory that is waiting to be improved, and you systematically and relentlessly challenge it until you force a breakthrough. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. In your project, in your work, maybe even in your personal goals, what's the real long pole that you've been avoiding? What's the ugly baby that everyone on the team kind of knows is there, but nobody really wants to talk about? Because finding it and having the courage to finally start shorting it, that is the first and most important step to getting where you want to go, a whole lot faster.